from the chapter on things, a little about another intriguing character, and that is Satan, or Lucifer. The idea of Satan as a fallen angel named Lucifer is not made explicit in the Bible, but likely developed from a couple of biblical references. In Luke, Jesus says, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven," probably reflecting an interpretation of the Old Testament prophet Isaiah's exclamation, "How you have fallen, morning star of dawn." We were talking about the morning star, evening star. "You who once brought nations down, or yourself cast down to earth." To give some context, the prophecy in Isaiah tells how one particular star aspired to climb higher than God's stars, to sit among God's divine assembly and become like the highest God. But Isaiah declares that instead it would be reduced lower than earth. As with most poetry, it works on several levels. It's introduced as symbolic of the Babylonian king, described as a man in the very same poem. It nevertheless also evokes and consequently condemns Babylonian and Canaanite astral theologies. By the beginning of the 2nd century, the Christian theologians Origen and Tertullian associated that Isaiah prophecy with Satan, and soon afterward, when it was translated into Latin, the Hebrew word Hallel, meaning morning star, was interpreted as the light bringer. So the light, or the thing that brings the light, so the morning star, right, was interpreted into Latin as the light bringer, which in Latin is Lucifer. And so the word Lucifer is a Latin one, and all it means is light bringer. But the English King James Version retained Jerome's Latin Lucifer and rendered it as a proper name, so gave it a capital L, making the association complete where it crystallized in the popular imagination. So we have this fallen star, Lucifer, who sought to be as high as God. Again, the final chapter in the book deals with God. There are all sorts of different names for God in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, or Hebrew Bible, and lots of different images for God, which is part of what I love about the Bible. It makes an absolutist theology very difficult to nail down, because there are all of these different ways in which God behaves, speaks, and even the names that people use to describe, and the narrators do to describe God, are quite diverse. There is constant tension in both the Old Testament and the New between God's otherness and God's likeness, between transcendence and immanence, between God's efforts to be known and God's defying human understanding. The Old Testament doesn't lend itself to a tidy systematic theology. Similarly, such definitive Christian theological positions as the doctrine of Jesus' fully human, fully divine nature and the triune God didn't immediately follow from the New Testament, but took centuries to develop. The diverse descriptions in the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament produce a many-layered profile of God, and those variations continue to stimulate dialogue and debate for both Jews and Christians about the nature and expectations of God. Every chapter begins with an epigraph, and actually one of my favorites was the one that begins that chapter on God, and it comes from Teresa of Avila, a Spanish mystic who was sainted in the Catholic Church, who comes from the medieval period. And she said, "The feeling remains that God is on the journey to," which I love for that particular chapter. But the conclusions epigraph goes to Billy Graham. And Billy Graham said, "I've read the last page of the Bible. It's all going to turn out all right."